Welcome to the Retail Insider video interview series. I'm your host, Craig Patterson, and we're joined here today with a special guest. This is Casdin Parr. He's Vice President of Retail Advisory Services at JLL based in Toronto. Welcome, Casdin.
Thanks so much, Greg. Great to be here and have a chat.
And lots of people here are going to know who you are, but let's talk very quickly. How'd you get started in this industry here?
I think like many in the business, within the Canadian marketplace, kind of fell into the business, candidly. Had some peers talk about the retail business and suggest I maybe might be a good fit for the business, and started my career on the property management side of the business with Ivanhoe Cambridge many years ago. Worked with great landlords across the board, including Oxford Properties, before switching to brokerage about 5 years ago. So a little bit of both aspects of it.
What are you seeing generally with retail as we head into 2024 here? I know that there's been some, projected headwinds, but it seems like there's still a lot of retail leasing happening right now.
It's a really exciting time for retail in the Canadian marketplace. I'll say the North American marketplace as a whole. There's been unbelievable trajectory over the last 18 to 24 months in particular. And retailers and landlords, I think, are working closer together than maybe ever before. And that's for a whole host of reasons. But between the high streets, and the shopping centers in the Canadian marketplace in particular, inventory is shrinking. The best quality brands and the best quality assets continue to grow by many metrics. So there's, again, just a lot of excitement building and really looking forward to 2024. In particular, I think we're going to see a lot of those fruits of the labor of the marketplace where we get another tranche of really exciting openings in many parts of the country.
Now, international brands are still looking at coming into the Canadian market. This is something that I've been told. Do you have any insights into what's bringing these international brands here, and why does Canada still seem to be so popular amongst retailers that may not be here already or looking at expanding?
Yeah, I think, Craig, you and your team, Canada, have done a great job over the years, going back probably the last 5 to 7 years, of how much international expansion has taken place in the Canadian marketplace. We've really seen 3 markets in particular, being Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, really establish themselves as international markets, both from a luxury standpoint and broader retail standpoint, with many of the international brands, particularly coming from Europe or elsewhere. And we've seen that momentum continue. So I think the stability of the Canadian consumer and the performance, the concentrated performance of those best high streets, power centers, and enclosed shopping centers gives the retailers confidence in terms of what they can expect when entering the Canadian marketplace. So I think that trend will continue. We've seen some great new entrants into the marketplace here in 2023. And I can tell you, both myself and our broader team are working with additional great brands that are considering 2024, 2025 for Canadian entry as well.
Now, street front versus shopping center. This is probably a complicated question because you're working with various brands, including some luxury brands, which are going to move into, say, Royal Mount and Oakridge and probably Yorkdale as well. But are you seeing any movements just generally around retailers saying we'd like to be on a street versus, say, in an enclosed shopping mall?
So I think what's really interesting, and this goes certainly to the luxury segment, but I think to the broader retail segment, retailers want to put their best brand experience forward. And that doesn't need to be exclusive to high street and or shopping centers. And the Canadian marketplace, both in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, again, kind of those major 3 markets where most brands are entering through, there's strength in both nodes. So, historically, Yorkdale, Toronto Eaton Centre have been some of the top shopping centers for brands to enter the Canadian marketplace from an enclosed standpoint. But we've really seen that come back full circle now, with the likes of Bloor Street and the activity in Yorkville, and all the exciting things happening on the street as well. So I think brands are less focused on where they make their entry into the country, and making sure that when they show up, whether in the top centers or the top high streets, that it's most reflective of their brand and the experience that they want to share with the customer. So I think it's more opportunity driven in these particular nodes versus one versus the other as an outright question.
And you mentioned Bloor Street. I know there was an article in the Toronto Star during the pandemic saying, "Oh my goodness, there's all these vacancies." I live in the area, and now I see there's almost no vacancies at all. I mean, because I know that some of the retailers coming that the signs may not be up yet. But what have you seen around demand? Say, let's talk about Bloor Yorkville just generally as a neighborhood, and what we're seeing with retail, including luxury, which is a big component of what's here.
Yeah, arguably there hasn't been more excitement in the country than the Bloor Yorkville node over the last 18 to 24 months. And listen, that article that you referenced, would have been accurate. There was a period of time, certainly through the pandemic, where there was lots of availability, but every retailer that comes through the marketplace now wants to see what's happening in the Bloor Yorkville node. We've seen more deal activity in the last 12 to 18 months than probably the last 5+ years combined. And that momentum, both in deals completed that are now open of brands, whether that's Ferragamo or Von Cleef on Bloor, or the exciting addition of Kith to Yorkville Avenue. To your point, there's another host of, probably another half dozen or so deals that are completed for 2024, 2025 that are yet to open. So we went from a position where there was lots of availability to a much reduced inventory of available product for retailers to consider going forward.
That is so interesting. Now, Toronto has been called a two-store market for, say, some luxury brands where they'll have a store perhaps, at the Yorkdale Shopping Center as well as in the Bloor Yorkville area. Are you seeing that continue in terms of what brands are looking for? Say if they have a store at Yorkdale or downtown in Bloor Street, they may look at one or the other for a second location?
Yeah, I think that is something I've talked about for a number of years, and go back to my landlord days and speaking with the broader retail community. And in some instances, a three-store market, for some of these groups as well, looking, potentially at an additional door down the line as well. They've seen success in both Yorkdale and Bloor independently. And I think many brands have been able to show that they can actually operate out of both and have success in both nodes independently. So there would be some cross shop of the consumer, but there's also enough of a market that could support both of these nodes independently as well.
Do you think there's room for a third luxury node in the greater Toronto area for retail?
I think it's how you define node. So, when we look at many of the US marketplaces, you have a very large department store program. And as we have some great department stores in the Toronto marketplace as well, but it's probably at a multiple of 2 or 3x in comparable sizes. So we've seen the likes of Holt Renfrew do a door on the Western GTA and others, and I think they're seeing some growing sales opportunities there as well. So again, for some brands, it's a one-store market. For most brands, I would suggest it's at minimum a 2-store market, and there are a collection of brands that do believe that there's a potential for a third store over the medium to long term.
Now, we're going to see a bit of retail disruption coming up here in 2024 with the opening of Royal Mount in Montreal, which for those that are not aware, probably people would be if they're listening to this, hopefully. It's going to be a major shopping center. It's going to have a mix of retail, including high-end and mid-priced, lots of popular brands. In Vancouver, at some point in 2025, the Oak Ridge Park project is going to be completed, which again is going to be somewhat similar to Royal Mount in that it's going to have all kinds of retail, including luxury retail. Where do you see retail going in the Vancouver and Montreal markets as these projects are completed?
Yeah, these are two of, if not the most exciting projects in the Canadian marketplace, some of the most exciting developments in all of North America, candidly. When we talk about the Canadian retail landscape with any of our peers across the North American sphere, both of these projects come up top of mind for both. I think both will have varying impacts in both marketplaces. Both are really exciting projects that are going to be well leased upon opening. I think the retail mix of both will be slightly different. To your point, I think Oak Ridge Park will certainly be primarily focused on the luxury segment, with some other ancillary retail uses added in, where Royal Mount will certainly have a strong luxury presence as well, but will also have more mass market and some additional retail categories in that project as well. So the magic question on any time a new project like these come into the marketplace is what type of impacts that can have on the consumer. And where do those trade areas get redefined? Where do those shopping patterns change? And I think that's the magic question that we may not have the answers on yet, but in 2024 we will begin to learn that in Royalmount, and as you mentioned, 2025 for Oak Ridge. So a lot of buzz and excitement in the community, and candidly in both of those trade areas and cities themselves. I know there's a lot of buzz and excitement anytime I'm traveling and talking to people about both these projects coming online sooner rather than later.
No, it's fascinating. Now, we've seen some interesting high-end retail move into the Alberta market, West Edmonton Mall. So I actually am from Alberta. I never thought, honestly, in my lifetime, I'd see luxury stores in West Edmonton Mall. I'm not sure why. I just didn't think it would be a destination. But I'd gotten word last week, interestingly enough, that the Gucci store at West Edmonton Mall is #2 in Canada for handbag sales for that brand. So that's showing that the Edmonton market has some luxury sales going on. Louis Vuitton has opened a store, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Montclair just opened last week. Tell me about Edmonton and Calgary. Have you had much dealings there recently with leasing and otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. Both great markets, both very important markets in the Canadian landscape. And again, it kind of goes back to what we touched on earlier, is the concentration of that top tier retail in both markets. Obviously, you have West Edmonton Mall, who's absolutely dominant in that marketplace for some of the brands you mentioned, and then Chinook in Calgary, again, one of the top 5 centers in the country by most metrics. And again, I was with some of the team with CF very recently and talking about some of the exciting things that they're working on in the near future as well. So again, I think the definition of luxury, and I've talked about this before, has changed. Certainly the brands you mentioned are traditional true luxury brands. But Nike, for instance, Nike's going to be opening a great flagship at West Edmonton Mall here in a few weeks. And really excited about helping facilitate that entry into that shopping center. But the definition of luxury now can be a Gucci handbag, a pair of great Air Force One Nikes, and maybe Lululemons or Alo Yoga, casual wear. So the definition has changed, but those traditional luxury brands have been performing in both of those markets, and I think will continue to do so as more of their peers join, in the medium to near future.
Are there any deals you've done recently that you might want to tell us about? Anything exciting that's happened in retail recently?
Yeah, listen, I think I've been really privileged to work with many great brands, as many of my peers at JLL have as well. We really get the chance to work with best-in-class retailers across the board. Most of which, there's some exciting things coming in 2024. I'll mention some of the ones that did happen. I touched about the Nike flagship that will open at West Ed here in a couple of weeks. They opened a beautiful flagship on St. Catherine Street with Ivanhoe Cambridge at Montreal Eaton Centre as well. That's performing exceptionally well. And I think there is, again, a lot of activity still to come for doors to be opened, candidly, in all markets across the country. So some of these will be new markets for some great international retailers, and then some will be some further expansion and reinvestment into the country across the board.
Let's quickly talk about outlet malls. Just to change the subject, we talked about luxury quite a bit, and I mean luxury retail. We're talking about full price retail. Give me insights into what we've seen. We saw outlet malls open across the country. I think it started a bit over a decade ago, and they kind of did an expansion and then stopped. It seems like each major market has at least one outlet mall. Do you have any insights into how they're doing? Any tenants moving around and whatnot? Because I know you've done a few deals, including I think a few Tory Burch locations a while back.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, a really strong category in the Canadian marketplace. Again, part of that goes to inventory because most of these markets, are not oversaturated with outlet shopping. But again, you have the likes of Toronto Premium, which is one of the top assets in the entire Simon portfolio across the board. The strength of Cross Iron Mills and Bond Mills, which to me is maybe the most interesting change in the outlet category, as they always have been a hybrid environment for retailers. But I think that's gaining a lot more traction now, maybe than ever before, letting the retailer determine what format is best for them to operate out of. And I think we've seen a big change in both Vaughan and Cross Iron, where you have many retailers operating a lot of full price business out of those shopping centers because that's what the consumer's looking for. So there's still some, I'll call them traditional outlet centers where, the landlord wants everybody to participate at, deep discounts, and give that. But I really believe the future is also going to entail a little bit more of that hybrid environment, where retailers can determine the best venue and best format for them to execute their outlet strategy, because that is shifting quite significantly, as omnichannel retail has really redefined, kind of what the returns are like, what outlet means, and how their distribution strategy has changed.
Anything else we want to mention here? This is really good. We could probably wrap it up.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a really exciting time. I've been talking to so many of my peers in the business, and there's a lot of positive things taking place in the retail and leasing environment across Canada. Inventory, ironically, has become our biggest challenge in many of these markets. Our friends at Yorkdale and Toronto Eaton Center, on the enclosed side, or Pack Center out west. I think the landlords are really looking at some really interesting opportunities for those Nordstrom resets in 24 and 25. It will take a little bit longer, but I think you're going to see some really exciting news coming out of that. And then again, the high street nodes continue to strengthen. So arguably in my career, this might be the most exciting time for retail in Canada, for the combination of the strength of these brands and assets, as well as what's ahead in terms of new store openings and reinvestment in the country. So as we all know in our business, things are always constantly changing and evolving, and I think we're going to see some real exciting additions in 2024 and beyond.
We'll definitely have to have you back. I'm going to be doing quite a few more of these interviews with people in the know. So thank you so much. This has been Casdin Parr. You're the Vice President of Retail Advisory Services at JLL, based in Toronto. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Casdin.
Excellent. Always great to speak with you, Craig.
And I'm Craig Patterson. I'm the founder and publisher of Retail Insider. This has been the Retail Insider video interview series as part of our podcast series. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Whether or not you're watching this or listening to this, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Take care and bye for now.